Carrie Sherburne, Senior Editor at What They Think, and I'm here with Jacob Aizikowitz, who is, wow, you've been in the industry a long time, but most recently you were the founder of XMPi, but you've been retired for about 3 years, right?
Yeah, thank you. Great having this conversation with you. Yes, I've been the founder and the leader of XMPi since its inception. But yes, I also have quite an extensive background in the industry before that with EFI and Cytex and all of that stuff.
But you couldn't quite stay retired, could you?
Well, certain things are part of the passion, and I can't disconnect myself. So from afar, I also look what's going on with XMPi. I'm doing some other things, but and also the context of our meeting here, I had a certain things about wanting to express certain set of opinions and background. Yes, I still have the
And
passion for what we did.
I had the opportunity to take a look at a white paper that you recently authored about modern variable data printing. And I was thinking, when did we start talking about variable data printing? And it goes back 45 years. I mean, if you think about 1977, which is when Xerox introduced the 9700 printer that was connected to a mainframe, and IBM also had solutions in that same time frame. Um, but over many years, the concept really didn't change that much. Now you're talking about modern VDP. So tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, okay. Look, I use the term modern VDP in the context of that white paper. So I'm not sure that it exists, but I think it makes sense to use that. You're absolutely correct that VDP started long time ago. And in all of these years, well, I was not aware of the 1977, but in any case, in all of these years, the focus of VDP was what we used to call transactional. So the focus of VDP was to be able to print your bills, to print your statement, to print things like that, where the data was in mainframe. And the print device was a line printer, but later also more sophisticated digital printers, all mostly at the time black and white. Uh, what characterized all of this, let's say, phenomena of variable data printing in these days, and by the way, in the paper I call it legacy VDP, or I sometimes use the term classical VDP. What characterized it was the focus on two focal points. One, the needs of the engine. Do whatever you need upstream to make sure that you feed the engine with data that it can process efficiently at the engine rated speed. So simplify whatever you do. You can't just do whatever you want. You have to restrict what you do so the engine will be able to print it. So it's like the engine is the center of thinking. And the other focal point was, or the other pillar was, of course, the data. And with the data, all of these technologies, on one hand, they knew how to take data from mainframes and all of that stuff, but the main premise was that you pre-process the data, you prepare it in such a way that it will be easy to process it while you're feeding the engine. So the whole discipline of classical or legacy VDP was tailored to make sure that you simplify the data before you start the composition or the printing process, and you make sure that what you demand from the print engine is simple enough so that the print engine can print it efficiently. Just as an example, in later years, you could see that the protocols that supported the printing for billing or transactional were protocols that had the notion of background and variable fields. We are familiar with the notion of pre-printed shells, and then on top of the pre-printed doing variable fields. So everything was tailored to address the needs of the engine rather than thinking in terms of what is there a need of originators, creative, or things like that. That was not part of the equation of the, let's call it classical VDP. And that's why,
And in the white paper, you talk about some of the technologies that have been developed, since 1977, that enable what you're calling modern VDP, that you couldn't have done this without the sort of underpinning of these technologies.
Yes, so really the whole notion of modernizing VDP, there are many things that were driving it, and it's there are always several ways to look at how it evolved. But on one hand, you have the color digital printers that started appearing, I think, in the 1995 onward, but every page could be different and full color. Of course, you need to feed the print engine with the information for the next page, but if you do it, the technology is such, it doesn't require anything beyond. So the print engines, as they were, could support variable data that would be much more expressive, creative, refined, whatever you want to call it, than what was the custom practice of VDP, what I call the classical VDP. Everything upstream was not ready for that. There was no way for people to interactively design variable data documents. Something that was very natural in desktop publishing, by itself a revolution that happened in 84, 83, 85. Something that was very natural in desktop publishing was not there for VDP. The whole notion of putting the creative or the authors, the originators, people like to call it the originators, at the center of the story rather than the print engine. And so there's a lot of capabilities that had to be developed in order to open the door for variability that is refined, as small as you want, wherever you want it, highly creative. How will you do that? And that's really the essence of the whole modernization process. It followed the footsteps of desktop publishing in the sense that there is a document in the desktop, and there is some command of printing that when you do it, you need to do what known for variable data, we know the composition process, and there is a print stream that needs to print. I don't want to go to all the details of the technology, but the desire to enable fine-grained variability drove two things. On one hand, on the print language, people call it the PDF or PDL, print definition language. On that side, we had to do something better than PostScript because PostScript did not express any variability. So eventually it led to developing and defining element-based variable data print definition languages that could tell the interpreter, here is an item that you better process it, keep the bitmap, and reuse it whenever the item is coming. So the language was very explicit. Today, the practice is PDF-VT, and it's one of the derivatives of this initiative. On the upstream, on the document side, if you, let's say, were doing, let's say, Adobe InDesign, or at the time Quark Express, or Microsoft Word, but there was no tool for you to say, okay, I want this graphic frame that has, let's say, a car picture with something around it, I want this to be variable. There was no tool for that. So we had to create that. So essentially, there are two critical elements that had to be defined. One is the notion of dynamic document. By the way, pretty much patterned after dynamic websites. And the other is the notion of element-based variable data print definition languages. So you define the two concepts. Now there's a lot of technology that we had to develop in order to do composition. So going from a dynamic document into a print stream, and you need to have clever interpreters that know how to do the thing with caching. So the concept, let me say this, the concept of enabling variability at the object level to a fine-grained variability, and pretty much not too different than what you have on the web, and to say that's what I want, is what was not so difficult to say. Say, okay, we need to move upstream to give the control to the originators. This was not a big invention. It was like following the pattern of desktop publishing. The concept of creating an element-based print specification language was a challenge, but then really the big challenge was, how do you do composition and interpretation in such a way that you will meet the speed requirements of the engine? Because nobody will buy something and say, oh, this is fantastic, highly creative, but by the way, it works for ages. So we had to solve that, and the paper goes about all of these different approaches, and there was a lot of technology that had to be developed. I know of the developments as we did them in XMPy. I'm sure that there are other flavors of development that try to approach the same thing, but it's all starting from the fact that you are enabling upstream to define documents that are dynamic, and what you can define, what you're allowed to define as a dynamic thing, something that may change from recipient to recipient, is unconstrained. You're not forced to say it's only in the top third rectangle, or things like that. Everything, the graphic frame, the character, the sentence, the word, the story, illustration, they can touch each other. All of that stuff is something that you enable upstream. You enable it, but now you're supposed to do composition efficiently and go and drive it.
And does this apply only to print?
Excellent point. Excellent point. If you remember, when you asked me about classical or legacy VDP, we talked also about the data. So VDP was living in a world where they say, okay, the data has to be prepared in advance. Otherwise, we cannot process it and meet the requirement of the print engine. What we did and what modern VDP is coming up, say, wait a minute. No, exactly like dynamic websites. The dynamic documents with their objects that can change, they have to be driven by linking to a database, maybe several databases. They have to be driven by things that can be scripts, and it has to be online. It has to be live as part of the composition process. You don't want to say that in order to actually do a create a variable data print job, you need to have a pre-processing of the data, creating one table of all the relevant data. And just as a anecdote, but it's a true story, the first customer ever of XMPy was a customer in the UK that knew Darwin, what we did at Cytex, which had the creativity but was driven by one table. And when he heard that in XMPy we actually opened the data model to say online database, etc., it addressed exactly what he needed, because he didn't want to add the pre-processing. That's a customer that did the children books, and this was truly something that changed the way that they could do the business. So the data model was another important element: online data with rules and the connection to real databases. Now it relates to your question, because once you enable that, once your print side is driven by online data with rules, it's not too different from the way dynamic websites are driven. And now you can start dreaming on saying, you know what, common foundation of data and rules that will help driving both the print and the web. Anyhow, so the modern VDP, because of its data model, made VDP something that could be played together with digital media, and in a fast forward thinking, it's the perfect match to creating journeys, customer experiences that involve physical products, physical things, and digital touch points along an experience and journey. So so modern VDP goes also beyond print.
Okay, and so when you think about, I guess going back perhaps to, the people that adopted this concept through XMPy or whoever, how did this benefit their businesses?
I think that, at least from what I know from our own experience with customers, again, those that had to embrace the XMPy solution, those that embrace a solution that has this online data in it, they had to change their thinking as printers. It's no more, I'll use again the classical metaphor that you get. In the old days, it was not even a table, it was a magnetic tape. Okay? So they could not go that way. And suddenly, just to do the printing, they had to work with real databases. So it forced them to make the digital transformation of their business. And now they could easily do print and digital, and they became actually digital savvy businesses. The most successful customers that I knew, and I'm sure there are other vendors also, but from the XMPI point of view, the most successful customers fully transform themselves. They start offering things that are print and digital and data and analytics and online programs and all of that stuff. But I think the fundamental thing was to be able to work with data as it is done in the modern digital world.
And so, are we at the sort of endpoint vision for this, or do you see some future developments that might come our way? What's next?
I think that well, it's not to always. What's next is a big open-ended question. There are several things that I believe are coming forward. First of all, I'll point out. I'll start from the end, from the one thing that is a challenge, or one of the big challenges. I think that at the time that modern VDP was invented, developed, created, to be able to work with the data the way I described, actually put it on the same level as what was done in the digital world. I think that by today, we know that the digital world, pure digital, not digital printing, the digital media world, it's moving light speed. They have new data models. They have new approaches to data. I think that there is a challenge on the print side to catch up, to do something that will put it back in the same thing. Putting this aside, I think that the practicing of modern VDP can be very powerful, both in terms of packaging or on product printing, even garments, because the marketing side of the brands, they want to see the product again, be it a garment or a package or a label. They want to see it as a part of a customer experience, not just as something that you use, open or eat it, and that's it. Part of a customer experience. And once this has to be part of an experience, and their thinking will be digital first, no matter how much effort will say that print is important, they will start digital first. So there is a big opportunity to show them that with practicing modern VDP, it's possible to put the physical items, be it a booklet or a product, okay, put the physical items as part of the journey, and it can be individualized on demand exactly as the digital side, and create the rich experience that they are all looking to have. And I think this is an opportunity to drive the modern VDP, whether packaging, labels, etc., as part of customer experiences, and to say yes, it can play. It's not an archaic, different, practice. It's as digital as all the other things. Okay. Beyond that, I think that at least my experience is that when you try to create journeys, to work with software that allows you to define what will happen when the customer landed on the website. You ask them a question, and then they want something. Then you do a PDF. You have this nice flows between touch points and things with some conditions. It looks very easy when you do it in a demo, but at the end, it's quite complex because you're sitting there as a marketing executive or professional, okay, and you're trying to define all the possible valuable, productive journeys. The journey for the customer is just going along a line. Is not doing, forking in different places. It's just in the plan. The blueprint is complex, and I think that eventually artificial intelligence will come into play to help the marketing or whoever is responsible for creating the communication and the engagement on the brand side will help them define the blueprints for good journeys. It's an open-ended question, but I believe that as it is, it looks nice, it's difficult, and AI maybe already came in, but will continue coming in more and more in order to help people create effective journeys. I believe that's a major opportunity. Um,
Well, Jacob, it's nice to see you that you haven't retired completely, and we really appreciate you sharing this thought leadership view. And for our viewers, In the description of this video, we'll put a link to the full white paper so that they can download that white paper. And it's very thorough and very detailed. So I think people will be really interested in reading that. So thank you very much for that, and thanks for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for doing this interview. For me, the first paper that I wrote about cross media was with you, so it's a nice. I like the fact that we did the interview with you. Thank you very much.
Closing the loop. Closing the loop.
Thank you.